Thank you for joining Direct Women for today's webinar. We will get started momentarily. Thank you for joining Direct Women for today's webinar on unlocking the secrets of international board opportunities. My name is Kelsey Velma, and I'll be your technical moderator behind the scenes. I'm the Director of Programs and Operations here at Direct Women, and I'm excited to be hosting today's session. Before we get started, I'd like to run through a few housekeeping notes. You should all be able to see the screen right now and hear my voice. Attendees, however, are muted, so although all of you can hear me, we cannot hear you. That said, you can still ask questions and we encourage you to do so. Please submit your questions using the Q&A feature in the Zoom console, not the raise hand or chat features. Feel free to submit questions at any time during today's program. Today's webinar will be approximately 1 hour with 45 minutes of content followed by a few minutes for Q&A. Our speakers' biographies will be provided in the chat once the program has begun. Lastly, there will be a short survey at the end of the webinar that we hope you will complete. It is only 4 questions and should take no more than 2 to 3 minutes tops. With that, I will turn it over to the moderator of today's program, Kim Yupchai. Kim?
Thank you, Kelsey. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today to learn unlocking the secrets of international board opportunities. So exciting. My name is Kim Yupchai, and I'll be your moderator. I'm the former Senior Vice President and Chief ESG Officer of Tenneco, one of the largest manufacturing and marketing automotive product companies in the world. I'm also a 2022 alumna of the Board Institute. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Direct Women, for more than 15 years, they have been really pursuing their mission to increase the number of women lawyers on public company boards. And their work includes identifying highly qualified women and helping them to position themselves for service on boards of major companies. And through programming like what you're participating in today, which is part 1, and you're going to hear more about part 2 as well, they help to create a pipeline of women leaders who can effectively serve on corporate boards. We have an incredible panel with us today, with us here, and I've learned so much from them in just preparing, and I hope you learn as much, if not more, in the webinar today. We'll start off with Gabby Apfelbacher. She is Senior Counsel at Clearly Gottlieb in Munich, and she currently serves on the boards of Kroll Bond Rating Agencies in Europe and Nomura Financial Products Europe. Gabby is a 2020-2021 alumna of the Board Institute. Welcome, Gabby. Carolyn is, you're welcome. Carolyn Campbell is Managing Partner and Chief Operating Officer at Emerging Capital Partners. She currently serves on the boards of ArtCaf Group, Burger King South Africa, ECP Power and Water Holding, and in addition, she previously served on the board of Wenatchee Group Holdings. Welcome, Carolyn. You're also a 2020 and 2021 alumna as well. And then finally, Kim Rivera is the Chief Legal and Business Officer of OneTrust and serves on the board of Thomson Reuters and Cano Health. She's a 2014 alumna of the Direct Women Board Institute. Welcome, Kim, and thank you all for being with us here today. So let's start off. I think when people think of pursuing international board opportunities, if they're like me, they think of a jet-setting lifestyle and you're going here and going there to these exotic places on a company-paid account. So let's look at whether or not those myths may be true and how an international board may differ from a US board. So starting off with, a lot of times in the US, the companies don't want another lawyer on their board. So it's almost a bias against lawyers. What can you say about that in Europe? Gabby, have you experienced the same thing?
European boards may be or may at least appear more welcoming to lawyers. At least as a matter of fact, you find quite a few lawyers on European boards, at least among the more seasoned board members. So what you have to bear in mind that over the past 5 to 10 years, board members in Europe are asked to show quite a few technical capabilities and expertise in areas such as finance, audit, ESG, and others. So if you're just a generalist lawyer, that probably won't do. For example, if you're looking at regulated industries, lawyers are very often most welcome because they understand the environment in which the company operates. There may also be other special circumstances, like if a company is either involved in many legal proceedings or is prone to be involved in legal proceedings, that may also call for a lawyer on the board.
Okay.
And with that, I stop for here.
Yeah. Well, it's great to see that they value lawyers then. That's wonderful to hear. What about the pay structure? Kim, can you provide us any insights on how pay on an international board or compensation might differ from a US board?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, I think that there can be quite a bit of variation. So I think you need to pay attention to the structure that you're sitting in. So just as an example, right? Most U.S. public company boards have a range, and everything is paid the same. Once you start looking at different kinds of international subsidiary boards, or private company, or family-owned company, or dual structure companies, I think the pay can be structured differently, and it can vary quite a bit. I don't have anything quantitative, like I don't have a quantitative study that I could point to, depending on the size, industry, market cap, and structure. It's just something to attend to make sure that you're very clear in terms of getting the information around how they think about board compensation and what the drivers are. And again, in public or listed companies, the restrictions around what can be done and not done around pay very different than what can be done privately, where there sometimes can be more flexibility and variability. So these are all just, I think, things to keep in mind. Although I think probably we do have consensus on this board that as you're thinking about board service, whether it's international or anywhere else, pay should not be the primary driver. It's interesting, but not really usually the determinative factor for most people in making the decision.
Yeah, you make a really good point, though, not to make assumptions, right? And to ask questions, ask for the detail, understand what will be reimbursed versus what won't as well. So excellent. Moving on to language or culture. Carolyn, tell us a little bit about, the private boards that you've been on and how it may be if it's a private board and maybe sometimes family members are involved.
Yeah, Kim, it's surprising how much of the world operates through family-owned private businesses, including in the US, but from Korean chai balls to Brazilian conglomerates to Jolly Pop here in the United States, as particularly where capital markets are thin, you see a lot more family-owned businesses because it's an evolution. You go through a process. A family usually starts a business, it grows, it gets outside capital, then it lists. So in emerging markets, you see them all the time. And no matter where they are, often you've had successive generations spend decades sparring with one another over strategy, succession, which cousin or brother or sister is going to lead. It's not unlike the show, and whether or not to remain private. So when you sit on side of board alongside family members, and I've even learned that here in the US recently in a couple of instances, it's really important to assess the dynamics prior to your appointment. You need to keep everyone sort of focused sometimes on board duties, not shareholder matters, or they have interests And depending upon the context, it often requires little extra diplomacy and patience and a good skill set to develop, but it does require that.
Yeah, I think that is an important point to make. One of my prior companies was very entrepreneurial, and we bought a lot of companies from their founders. And those companies are like their babies. So they really do fight. They're passionate, right, about fighting for what they think is right for their company, because it's part of them. They grew it. So very,
Lots
very
of
good.
stories, yes.
Yeah. Now, I took Spanish in college, right, or through college. I don't know that exactly qualifies me to sit on a Spanish speaking board somewhere. So Gabby, how do I navigate it if, my language skills are not up to snuff? Does everyone have like earplugs like in the UN, or how does it work?
Yeah, very good question. And first, I just wanted to chime in on Carolyn's comment. The human factor is just essential, I think, on all boards, and particularly if you are the foreigner on a board. And so let's start with the language skills. I mean, I think it takes a lot of courage if you want to join a board where you don't speak the native language of the other board members. For two reasons, I think. Number one, you will miss the side conversations, which are very often more important than the actual discussions held during the board meeting, or at least as important as these. And then the other point is, very often, boards or subsidiary boards of international companies, of large US companies, they will tell you no props at all. We do simultaneous translation during the board meeting. But if you have ever attended these kind of meetings and you know the language and you listen to what is translated there, sometimes it doesn't have much to do with what is actually discussed in the meeting. So I think, first of all, the risks are pretty high. And then second, I just don't think that you would really enjoy it. Being there, not understanding the language, I think you would feel pretty much like an outsider. Mm-hmm. And so I would only encourage everybody to seek out boards where you speak the language of the other board members.
Yeah, I know my own personal experience in China. I've been in situations several times where I know the translator did not tell me exactly what was said because it was harsh or rude or embarrassing, and they felt uncomfortable saying it, to me. But one of the other lawyers are like, no, what they really said was blah blah blah. Right? He just called you, difficult. Right? So, oh, you're on mute, Kim.
Yeah, I was unmuting. So just to pick up on this thread, because I think that it's been across the thread that each of the three of you touched on. Culture and language should definitely, right, be something that you're thinking about in terms of fit. Separate from your ability or interest to really work on something where you think you can add value because of your experience and substantive expertise. We shouldn't lose the thread that whether it's fully public, fully private, family owned, or increasingly some combination, having some public float, but a majority ownership interest, whether it's in an institutional investor or a family-owned majority piece. The point is understanding the fundamental dynamics between the players in the boardroom and their various positions and attitudes and perspectives on what really the job and ultimate right answers are is the most important thing. So wherever you sit, you need to be comfortable that you're able to get that context and color in a way that helps you meaningfully understand, okay, who are my fellow board members, what animates them, what drives them, how do they listen, how are they persuaded, do they have an agenda or a view that's really important? Ultimately, to be effective, you need to be able to do that. And so it's a whole bunch of things. It's language, it's culture, it's structure. But I think the guiding lens you should use is you want to be able to be effective in that room with your fellow board members. And if any of those aspects give you great pause, you should pay attention to that,
Yeah.
that instinct, and be careful about it.
Yeah, and to your point, Kim, you know, even in the boardroom, you need to have relationships. And if you don't have those inputs, color commentary, if you can't fit in with the culture, it's going to make it a lot more difficult to build the relationships that you need to succeed.
I agree. And the fun of being on the board is having a good constructive relationship with your fellow board members and working through things. If you don't, I have to say, I'll just speak for myself, without that, it would not be that interesting or fun a thing to do, right? It'd be not as rewarding.
You are in the room with them for many hours, so it's much better if you can get along and like the people that you're with. Absolutely. All right. So let's turn now to travel and hours. Again, you can have the glamorous jet setting image in your head, but what's it really like? How many hours should one expect to devote in service to an international board? Kim, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to, I'll just give you my rough rule of thumb for, and this is based on a larger company, but that has a regular cadence, is well established, has 5 to 6 meetings a year, 1 per quarter, and maybe 1 or 2 special meetings that tend to happen. But ordinary course, I always calculate at least 150 hours of work associated with all the meetings. And, by that, I mean, ramping up, reading the materials, understanding the issues, investing in showing up to the meetings, well prepared and able to engage. And there's always some committee work or other things that you get asked to do. So I think a safe rule of thumb is about 150 hours per year at least, assuming everything is copacetic.
And is that with or without travel?
I don't include travel in that. I don't include travel to and from that. That, and again, that really depends on where you are, right? If you find something that's right in your backyard, it's not significant. In international, you need to factor in the wear and tear and disruption of, international trips. And then I do warn people, we're entering an era of a lot of disruption. I mean, we've just been through a fascinating global era of disruption, but right now, in terms of the macroeconomics, the geopolitics, the technology evolution, there's going to be a lot of disruption and a lot of ups and downs. When a company has a major crisis, a major transaction, or a major issue to tackle, you can go ahead and take that 150 way up. So keep that in mind as well. I will tell you, I have been in board situations on both sides where we were meeting every week, all year, 2 hours a week, in addition to all the other board meetings, and doing work in between, right? So 400, 500, 600 hours of work. And you have to just pay attention to how many crises or disruptions are happening or potentially happening, and what you choose, because that's part of what you take on. You accept the fact that if there's a crisis, you need to lean in.
Yeah, I'm sure the board of directors for Bed Bath & Beyond are really earning their money right now. Can you imagine, with the bankruptcy and everything? That's a lot. That's a lot. Carolyn, what about you? Because you've got travel to South Africa and I think to France.
Yes, and then previously to other places, and echoing on the crisis, with those sorts of destinations where your companies are based, should you have a crisis, you can find yourself at home on a call at 3 a.m. So just a distributed disruption of service sort of hack that's successful can entail a lot of those nights too, even right in your home. So yes, it's interesting. It is very different when they're far. The destinations are far. I think that has to be taken into account. And I was just thinking about this last night. The London Business School did a little article, a one-pager on me. I don't know why, maybe somebody that I knew in a former iteration, called A Day in the Life. I guess perhaps they do that for a lot of people. And it was during a visit to our triple play company where I had a board meeting, a visit to the network operating center. And I decided to dust it off and read it. And reading it made me exhausted, up at 7:30 and meeting, board meeting, lunch, go to the knock, come home. But I was slightly younger when this study had been done, and I could fly overnight, arrive early morning, and run straight to a meeting. Now I take an extra day on the arrival, and I probably should have been doing that all along. It allows my mental acuity to rebound from the jet lag. I'm more pleasant, I think, in my interactions and not in such a rush. And I absorb, changes in the local context that could be relevant depending on where the company is operating. Also, in the case of the French case for a France-based board, it allows me to regain my fluency, because even if I'm working online, Zoom calls in French, it's so much easier if I'm ordering my breakfast and my coffee and I get those neural pathways firing. I'm sure Gabby feels the same way. It can get a little rusty and it's good to do that. So that would be my tip there. But it takes an extra couple of days, I think, per meeting on top of what Kim just said. So
that makes sense. And in South Africa, what language do they conduct the board meetings in?
Oh, that one is in English, but got to be kind of, as I said, the mental acuity, because there are accents, and some of them for Afrikaans can be thicker than just American or even British English. So you want to be able to listen really carefully. In addition to what we've been saying about just paying close attention to pick up on local signals and local context. So yeah, I try to have chats with colleagues on the board between board meetings more regularly than not. So that helps as well. But they are still worth doing. They're very exciting and very rewarding. And I don't mean to say that it's not a joy to do it. It is definitely a worthwhile experience.
Yeah, no, certainly. Gabby, travel was probably a little bit easier for you since you're already in Europe.
Yeah, it's easier, but just adding to Karen's accents, I am on the board of an Irish company, and my fellow non-executive directors are Irish. And so it definitely helps to have chats with them in between meetings, or take the time, arrive early, have dinner with them the night before the meeting, if there is no full board meeting, or after the meeting. I think, again, and I think that goes to Kim's point, trying to be effective really takes taking the time to get to know your fellow board members and be able to work with them constructively. And then maybe one other point on international boards. On my other board, there are attendees in Japan, in Germany, and sometimes in the US. So, the board meetings are at inconvenient times because, otherwise it just doesn't work out with the time difference. That's also something one has to bear in mind. But again, I would agree with Caroline and Kim. It's definitely worth it doing it, but just doing it very knowingly about all these circumstances around.
Absolutely.
The
good.
boardwork.
Those are good tips. And I just wanted to note there's a couple of questions submitted in chat so far, and really focused on how do you find the opportunities, and we are certainly going to get to that in just a minute. So thank you for submitting those, and please keep them coming. Let's turn next to regulatory differences. So, maybe we think, well, we're lawyers, we understand how the laws work. Gabby, do you see differences between US and EU?
I think although sort of the main themes are the same on both sides of the Atlantic, but the way regulators are playing these themes are very different. This starts with the corporate governance regimes. They are different. If you look at, compare a US company to an Irish company, and even more so if you compare it to a, let's say, German company, which has a two-tier board system. So there are differences there. But also, if you look at regulated industries, that was fascinating for me to find out. On my Irish board, the company, it's a rating agency, it's regulated by ESMA, that's the European Capital Markets Regulator. And ESMA pretty bluntly says that they are looking at the independent non-executive directors as their extended arm into the company. And that raises all sorts of concerns, I think, in terms of, my loyalties are with the company, but then there's this regulator, and they are holding conversations with the non-executive directors regularly, and so that's very interesting. And you have to be prepared for that and have to find out before you join a board.
Absolutely, absolutely. Carolyn, what about liability as a director?
Yeah, the directors and officers insurance limits and how they operate, they do differ in different markets. So I always check that. You can talk to a company about it if you think it's not adequate. I do think the limits are getting bigger. Also the deductibles, I don't want to be ever facing a big deductible. If anything goes wrong, you want to know that you're covered, the company's D&O insurance will pay, and it will take care of you. I would also say that liability, just like in the US, I would say it's kind of increasing everywhere. I think regulators are looking at board seats. I think from the banking sector to the tech sector, in all the markets, you get vetted more by regulators. And it's not a nerdy little afterthought. It is a pretty important question, no matter where your board ends up being.
Yeah, definitely want to make sure you're covered. Exactly. Yeah. And then Kim, is public and private the same as it is as what we think of it, or are there other nuances to it?
I think the nuance, I mean, the private and public is pretty straightforward, right? If you're publicly listed in a public float, versus private, whether that's family, private equity, venture capital, right? Those are clear enough. But I think increasingly you also see these hybrids where it's listed, it's gone public, it's listed, and you saw this with a lot of the SPACs, the SPAC mania that we had, where yes, you have a public float, but the public float is a small portion of the total ownership. And I find those to be really, if you're an independent director sitting in one of those seats, that is a tricky space to be in, because you know that your duty to the company and to the shareholders, right, is to the public float. That's, you're independent, you're a fiduciary, you're objective, you're a disinterested director. But when you sit with directors who own a majority, either in combination or huge swaths of the company still, whether it was because they sponsored it or they're an early investor, that period of time between when the board becomes fully independent and disinterested, and those folks are still sitting on the board, whether it's a global company or a domestic company, I find that the governance issues, the issues in general, the boardroom dynamic, and how you navigate fundamental things like strategy, succession, the things that boards are there to oversee, the dynamics can be really tricky. Also pay attention to dual listed companies, companies that there's some complexity behind that as well, right? I sit on a dual listed company listed in Canada and listed in the US as well. And they're very sophisticated and have been that for a long time. But these are all things I think to educate yourself about and understand, they make a difference to how things are going to go in that boardroom and the kinds of issues that you're going to face and the kinds of issues that you're going to have to help navigate and resolve can get really tricky.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, all good points. So I know there's been
Maybe
a,
just,
go ahead.
sorry, maybe just very quickly, following up on Kim. I mean, there are also very particular issues if you have a non-US company, for example, a European company listed in the US. And many of the European tech companies, they prefer US listings because there is better research coverage, and very often if they IPO, sort of the share price levels are higher, so there are incentives to list there, but that also raises these kinds of complexities Kim just mentioned.
Yeah, very good points. Very good points. Well, given the questions that are in the chat, I'm going to skip to our question of how did you find a board? And Gabby, can I start with you? Like, did you just wake up and someone was knocking at your door? Hey, I'd like to give you a board position today.
That's a sweet dream, I think, basically for everybody. I mean, sometimes you're told these stories that this happens, but generally it doesn't. You know, my first board seat, it just came through one of the big international headhunters. So that's not such an interesting story. The much more interesting story is the board I actually got through Direct Women, because I was, you know, I attended the Board Institute in 2020, 2021. I became an alumna. And then, you know, the general counsel of the US parent of my Irish company, they were looking for a new non-executive director for their Irish board. And so she had been to one of the Direct Women lunches, and so she recalled that they are alumni. And she contacted Direct Women, and you know, so I heard about the opportunity, and I gave it a shot, and it worked out. So just a recommendation to everybody attending the webinar: if you have not yet considered attending or participating in the Board Institute, you should seriously consider to apply. I can only recommend it.
Yeah, or if you're looking for a diverse candidate for your board, for your company's board, again, it's a great resource for you. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that story, Gabby. Carolyn, what about you? I mean, you had a run on boards last year.
Well, I sort of joined my first board because I was obliged to. I'm a founder and a very senior executive at a private equity fund management group. So for the past 20 years, I've been, you know, getting my chops by going on our portfolio company boards of directors. And these were very interesting and challenging experiences through multiple business cycles. And I made a lot of contacts and met people who appreciated some of my value add on, I mean, in my case, finance, audit, ESG, and strategy. But I think this is applicable more broadly to anybody, that if you are doing a nonprofit or a private company, even a small one, you will meet with other stakeholders, investors, headhunters, management, et cetera, any one of whom can remember you for an opening. That's the exercise of the networking. And I guess of interest, one of my current two roles is actually a reprisal. I'd been on our energy platform company board from 2009 to 2016. It was an era of great growth. This is a pretty large company and it operates globally. And I had been very interested in and sort of deeply involved in rolling out an upgraded ESG system, because there's a utility part of it. And I was recently asked to return to that board in 2020 when a large Scandinavian conglomerate acquired a controlling stake. So I'd love to say I can see them coming, but I don't always. And I think the lesson for me would just be you never know, right? It might be the law firm that sees you, the accounting firm, and yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. Kim, what about you? How did yours? Did it come in a gift box with a bow on it, or?
Shocking, I'm the only one. No, not at all. So first of all, I feel like I'm the OG of the panel since I'm the class of 2014. Like I'm coming up on 10 years after. Although I agree with what Gabby said, and I agree with Carolyn. So a couple of things. How I got my first board seat was through a more traditional route of like one of the big international recruiters reaching out to me. How I got my second board seat was really actually through a private network of people who knew me. Having said that, I was very just for the folks who are like in the audience today, I was super specific and super tactical. Like I feel lucky that I got to do the Direct Women Institute. It was hugely helpful in helping me kind of reframe my board readiness, my value proposition, why I wanted to do it, like that part, and being part of that network, very good. And I highly encourage it. And any other groups that are very focused on board service, it cannot hurt you to be doing that networking and having that. Now, to the extent that, like me, you don't have oodles and oodles of luxurious extra time to engage in many of my extracurricular activities, what Carolyn said is very important. The other thing that I did is I got very clear, like on my 3-minute why I want to be on a board, and there's no one I didn't tell about it. Like literally, there's no one I didn't tell about it. My boss, my colleagues, my peers, my family, people I work with outside, people I work with inside, and I just sort of very quickly made it known. This is something I'd love to do. Here are some of the things I'm good at. Happy to entertain, or if you know anybody, who's looking, keep me in mind. And I just want to be clear. I was in the class of 2014. I went on a board in 2019. So like, just to give you a sense, right? Sometimes these things happen very quickly, and sometimes finding the right fit takes a little more time. So I wouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. I would make it known to people. I would network. I would use places like Direct Women. And to be perfectly frank, I think there's probably 4 global recruiters who do the global Fortune 1000. It's the same 4 or 5 people. And if you're able to get the right introduction and have them assess you and put you in their database, you'll be in there. Eventually, they cycle through the same people in their database and they're always looking to expand it. That's pretty much how it is. But it can be because you have a great relationship with somebody, even an executive or someone else who goes, I know somebody who would be great for a board. Let me put them forward. So
yeah. And Kim, I just had this vision of you at the grocery store, like, hi, my name is Kim Rivera. I'm
exactly.
governance.
Exactly. I need a pound of these tomatoes. Also, if anyone here is interested in corporate service, please know. I say it a little bit tongue in cheek, but I do think you have to have kind of that. I think it's helpful to have that confidence and attitude and understand it's a process. It's one you should be engaged in and comfortable with. And there's no doubt it doesn't hurt to make it known. It just doesn't do any harm to do it.
Right. If you don't put yourself out there and make the ask, how are people going to know? How will they find you? Right. And in a little bit at the end of the webinar here, Kelsey is going to share information about our London event in June, where some of those recruiters will actually be present and tell people how you can be a part of that event as well. So let's step back for a moment. When did you decide, or why did you decide you wanted to pursue an international board? Like, were you an 8-year-old playing with Barbies and I'm the board chair and, here's the vote, yay or nay? Gabby, when did you decide you wanted to pursue something?
I was in private practice before, and I had done transactional work, M&A, capital markets, and corporate governance work. So I had seen boardrooms from inside. And at some point, I just decided to pivot. And I just thought, okay, I would just be super interested in that, more on the sort of strategic thinking side of the table, on the overseeing side. And that was also the reason why I left the partnership of my firm, because that would have created conflicts. And that is, I think, also a very important point. If you are serious about board seats, you also need to think about conflicts, because when you are in serious discussions about a board position, and then after the third or fourth round of interviews, and when you get close to being invited to join the board, and then you come up with, I'm sorry, I may have a conflict, that really doesn't go well. So you should think about that beforehand. You should think about your day job, whatever it is, whether that's compatible with a board position. And so that may also determine the right time when to actively look for boards. I think there are sort of two different phases. There's a phase when you prepare to become board ready, and then there's the phase where you are actively looking and doing other things that were just mentioned. You're networking, making it known to the rest of the world that you are interested in board work, etc.
Excellent. Carolyn, what about you? When did you start thinking about it?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to study abroad at a very early age. My parents were originally from Canada, so we've spent a lot of time up there, and still most of our family is across the country. But something struck me in the nature of the question. This is a webinar about international boards. And so if you're trying to gear up for it, you might want to have some international experience in terms of, before joining a board, have you done any business overseas? Have you lived anywhere else? So I'm thinking, without my board hat on now, but as someone who would potentially hire a board member or conduct a search, and we would say, this person did this in Thailand or Vietnam, they're going to do it again in my new emerging market. Or someone ran a utility in Mexico, maybe they can help with us in Spain. I think there's that angle. Do you really want to gear up your experience to have a language and some experience overseas? That said, I'm not going to say we always only hire someone who's got a jet set lifestyle or lived a few years somewhere else. We have occasionally taken someone very local from the US, but I think it's harder for that person to join the board and do all the things we've talked about today. Get the culture, the language, try to get the nuance, figure out the local regulations and the D&O insurance and what's really happening. So I guess that would be my point, but I always was enticed by languages. I lived in Eastern Europe for 4 years. I lived in the rest of Europe for another 5. And I traveled extensively. So the answer is just yes to your first question. Yes.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. Kim, what about you?
Yeah, to round us out, I mean, Carolyn stole a little bit of the thunder, which is, for me, it's really 3 things. First of all, I grew up in Puerto Rico and Paraguay, so that I lived in Europe for quite a bit of time. And in addition to all of that, pretty much every company, or almost every company that I've worked at, is a huge global company. So I've run businesses and done business, all over the world. And had teams that I've managed in different parts of the world. And so from that perspective, as I think about different board roles, right? I mean, it's that experience, that perspective, that expertise that is best deployed, right, in a global context or an international context, whether it's an international company or, just a US-based big global company. That is a part of it. Second, a huge part of my career was spent doing board work, all right, helping boards navigate all the governance, all the disclosure, all the high level challenges that boards do. And then I have some breadth in my background in terms of having run a bunch of other businesses outside of just doing corporate governance work. And so the combination of those three things made me feel like it would be super fun and interesting to be able to work at the board level on those issues, because I'd seen them 15 or 20 years from the other side, right? To Gabby's point, and I was like, wait a minute, I could do this. I can also be on the other side, which is what motivated me. And it so happened that I didn't say I only want to do an international board, but it so happened that the first thing that was a great fit was an international company that happened to be headquartered and listed outside the US. And so, but that's both how I came to want to do board stuff and also the fit with the international piece.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, thanks each of you for sharing your insights here. We're going to turn now to question Q&A. So I think Kelsey just posted in the chat. If anyone has questions for the panelists, please go ahead and enter them. One of the questions I saw, actually a couple on this, is how do you pivot from a local nonprofit board to an international board? Anyone want to comment on that?
I'm happy to take a quick cut. I mean, a very quick cut. I don't know that you can make that kind of pivot. And when it comes to nonprofit board service, what I would say is, I think translating nonprofit board service to for-profit board service is it's not a logical or easy thing, and it's not even a logical path. I think there might be some instances in which it can be, and I'll give you the three things that I think are essential. One, it has to be a board that actually has people on it who do for-profit work or are connected in some way to international boards or for-profit work. So you network with them. Second, it has to be the kind of nonprofit that has a profile sufficient and issues complex enough that you could make the case that the leap is not so different. I guess it's really only those 2 points. They're not created equal. I will say, I think if you don't have experience serving on a board, serving on a nonprofit is a good introduction to starting to learn about the ways that the board job is very different than the organizational job. But I would be careful about what you want to do is be on for-profit boards. I'm not sure nonprofit. There's great reasons. I do a bunch of not-for-profits, but I don't do them because of a connection to the board. So that's my honest answer.
Or maybe it could be, maybe if it's a local nonprofit that also has an international parent, right? And so you could work your way up to that international parent board. But Carolyn,
There, just one exception to what Kim said. There are also, I think, when I look at some of the board members in the big private companies, you do see some overlap with some of the global nonprofits, but those are as hard to get on as a global multilateral. So care.org or MasterCard Foundation. It's sort of more of not a celebrity, but you have to have some serious, you're probably getting on private boards anyhow, if you're getting on those big ones.
At that point.
And maybe one last point, and then I think Kim mentioned this, the profile. I think what definitely is a great profile for a nonprofit if they just have get a lot of money. So if you can make the point that was a really from a financial point of view, a huge responsibility. Sort of administering the funds. I think that's a very valuable experience.
Okay, all right. Here's the next question. What are your thoughts regarding going back to school to get an MBA degree, after being in big law? Does that help to make you more marketable, or do you think it doesn't really make a difference?
I'm happy to answer quickly, which is, I think if you have an interest in being a business lawyer, whether that is going, just out of the pure outside counsel practice either focusing intensely on business practice, or going in-house and learning what it is to be a business executive, inside, driving the legal function. An MBA could be helpful. I don't know that it's really that helpful or relevant to board service. It can be very valuable to expanding your experiences that might make you more eligible for a board, but I wouldn't do it for that reason.
Yeah, that's fair. Gabby or Carolyn, anything you'd like to add to that?
I might add that if you're going to do anything, I mean, the MBA really is, I feel like, to get in and do strategy for a business. We hire them for our meat and potatoes of what we do with our companies, but some of the degrees that come to mind is really helpful. So I think an MBA, absolutely, Kim, couldn't agree more. But any sort of accounting certification or like a real technical skill that you could show, I think those are also really helpful. Kim said she had defined her role in her search pretty narrowly, and I think I have found that that's very helpful as well. So,
well, and it's on the audit committee and looking at all the financials, it's just going to make it a lot easier on yourself, right? Than if you're trying to digest all of that in a foreign language on top of it, that can be a lot, for sure.
Yeah, I couldn't, sorry.
Go ahead.
No.
Yeah, I
please,
couldn't
Gabby, go
agree.
ahead.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, each and every board needs a financial expert. Some of them now need 2 financial experts. If you can qualify for that, that's great. And I think the other expertise that's really sought after right now is ESG. So if you can somehow, and you need to be able to demonstrate, yes, Kim, I think you're sort of set, but you need to be able to demonstrate that a pure interest in ESG matters, that's just not sufficient. You need to be able to demonstrate that you are familiar with the sustainability reporting or ESG strategies or whatever. But I think that is very valuable.
Mm-hmm. So part of the reason that I got involved in Direct Women was because my NOM Gov chair sort of gave me a kick in the butt and said, get on this. Like, I know you want to do this. You've got to start now. Don't wait, right? Let's do this. What do you guys think? Does age or stage in your career really affect the opportunities for joining boards?
I'll go first. I think 2 things. One, do you have sufficient experience? And that's sort of a stage age, sort of, although there are folks early and mid-career who might have experience in very hot areas. And so I'll tell you what I think in general are super hot areas, right? Digital transformation, AI, technology, right? ESG, reporting, governance, real issues around evolving governance demands for boards. You can be mid-stage career, but if you have a super solid base in that, it might make you a compelling or interesting candidate. Some very big established boards, and they're starting to move away, want people who have 20, 30, 40 years experience. That's just kind of how they default to. There's nothing you can do about that, right? Some prefer. I would encourage everyone, separate from stage and age, to just think about capacity. In order to enjoy it, in order to do a good job, you just have to be at a stage and age where you have the capacity to do it. And I have seen board members, men and women, who were mismatched in that way, and it was a struggle. It was a struggle for them, and eventually, they had to either step down or step away because it just wasn't workable. So I think more than anything, pay attention to where are you in your life, how much capacity do you have, or can you make to do something like this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, do you need more support? Absolutely. Gabby, any other thoughts to share?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think that's the most important thing. And also, at least in what I see in Europe right now, they're also looking for a good age mix. So there may be opportunities for younger board members, especially in the AI, digitization, etc. Sphere. But again, then it boils down to the capacity issue.
Yeah. Carolyn, anything else?
Oh, no, I think that really
Yeah.
sums it up. I've taken opportunities before I was ready, and sure they learned a lot, but I kind of could have waited. And I probably got warned before I jumped onto something huge, but you kind of know when you feel like you're ready, I feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but
You want to have experience to bring, and it's a
Right.
much more fulfilling situation.
Yeah, but to your point, so, if you've done something transformative in an industry, if you were part of it, right, that's a great marketing tool for you. Or if you had your own business and sold it or something else, right? There are possibilities that people will want that kind of experience and knowledge. And again, until you put it out there, you're not going to know, right? And make the serious efforts on it. I know Kelsey has put a link to our flyer in the chat. Please be sure everyone to open that up. That is about our event in London. And Kelsey, did you want to come on and talk about that, or would you like me to pitch it? I can't remember which way it was going to go. All right, well, since she's not signing on, I think I'll pitch it for her. This is an invite-only event, but it is free. You do have to, get yourself to London somehow. But there are firms that have been on the in the flyers and whatnot, and those firms are the ones that have the tickets. So they are sponsors, and if you connect with one of those firms, here we go. And let them know, hey, I'd like to go to this event, then each firm has select tickets to provide to its clients and family and friends. If you're an alumna, then you are also able to apply and be a part of the event. It's going to be a lot of fun. To attend the event, you can contact Sean Taylor Kaminsky, and her email address, I think that it is on the screen. There we go. Right there in the middle there. And she'll share that post program as well. This is our first ever international board program, so we are really excited about it. Europe is ahead of, I think, the US in realizing the importance of diversity on boards. So there's even more opportunities for women there than there probably are here in the US. And, we're looking forward to partnering with other organizations over there to really make a difference and to be that pipeline as well.
And Japan just announced they're going to move in this direction a little bit too. I don't know if anyone else saw it, but getting into that first would be a first mover advantage.
Excellent. Excellent. Let's see, we have another question here. What sort of financial considerations do you take into account in accepting a paid international corporate board position, like tax, compensation? Any tips that you guys have?
Sorry, I was just gonna say quickly 3 things. One, it has to be enough. Like, I'm not doing it for the money, but if it's too low, given the amount of time and disruption, like I just am careful about that. Second, it can be structured in a variety of ways. You need just to look. Oftentimes, it's some combination of equity and cash. And for tax reasons, I usually, if I can, everything in equity and do it all deferred, right? I don't need the money. I'm not doing it for the money. I'll take the equity and defer it all until I'm done with the board. I really don't get or own anything. It's just accumulating. That is the most tax efficient and simplest way to do it and not have to deal with multiple filings and lots of other stuff. So it can have some complexity. I'd pay attention to that.
Agree.
I think it depends a little bit, like the tax stuff, where you are a resident. And there you also have to watch out for not be viewed as an employee by your local whatever tax and social security, because that might be really very disadvantageous. And I mean, we didn't do that, but I can just throw in a number just to get you an idea. Like, for example, in Europe, you know, the pay for board seats, it's more in the, you know, 90,000 to 150,000 euros max, and that's already a lot. And it's very different. It may be like 1/3 or 1/2 of what you would expect in the US, and you just have to be aware of it.
Yeah, excellent. So last question, people ask, who are the 4 recruiters? And I know 3 of them, Russell Reynolds, Spencer Stewart, are actually 4, Egon Zender, and Heydrich and Struggles. So first of all, thank you to the panelists today, just incredible insights. Thank you for sharing your experience and your wisdom. Thank you so much to the audience today. We've really enjoyed having you and hope that you come and join us in London. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank
See you
you.
all.
Thank you. See you in London.
Yes.